What would you do if your wife laughed and told her whole family she regretted marrying you every single day? That's exactly what happened to me at a backyard BBQ, smoke rising from the grill, beers in hand, everyone smiling like nothing could go wrong. Then Heather said it, loud, casual. I regret marrying him every day. People laughed. Someone clinked a glass. I didn't. I set my beer down, looked her straight in the eyes and said, "So do I, and that's why I'm ending it today." Her smile died right there. And that's when they realized I knew more than I'd ever said. If you've ever been disrespected by the person you loved, hit subscribe, drop a comment, and stay with me. This story only gets darker from here. I meant what I said, and everyone at that picnic table felt it. A beer froze halfway to a man's lips. Someone's fork hovered in the air like it forgot where it was going. Heather's dad didn't shout. He just narrowed his eyes, that quiet, cut-it-out look fathers use when a backyard starts turning into a courtroom. Heather tried to laugh it off. "Babe, come on, I'm kidding, it's a joke." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't give her the fight she was baiting me into. I just leaned back a little, calm enough to scare her, and asked, "Were you?" That one question sucked the oxygen out of the table. Her smile twitched. Her eyes darted. Cousins, mom, dad, looking for someone to rescue her with another laugh. I kept my gaze locked. "You've been making me the punchline for years," I said, "and you got comfortable because I kept swallowing it." She opened her mouth, then closed it. I nodded once. "We're not doing this here," I said, steady. "But understand me, what you just said, that doesn't unsay itself." And as the silence spread, I could feel it. The next thing out of my mouth would change what her family believed about her. Heather sat there looking like the perfect wife. Bright smile, easy laugh, the kind of woman who knows how to work a room. At a suburban BBQ, she was pure charm. If you only knew her from daylight and small talk, you'd swear I was the luckiest guy at the table. That's why her jokes worked. They sounded harmless to everyone else. But I knew the pattern. Not one big betrayal you can point at, just the steady drip. The little comments that make you feel small, the eye roll when you talk, the way she'd playfully correct me in front of people like I was a child. Death by 1,000 cuts. Quiet enough that you start questioning your own gut. And I kept doing what men do. I showed up. I paid the bills. Kept the lights on. Kept the mortgage current. Told myself this was strength. Absorbing pressure, keeping the peace, being the steady one. Sitting there with everyone watching her face tighten, it hit me clean. My silence wasn't strength anymore. It was surrender. And the worst part? I hadn't snapped because of one line at a BBQ. I snapped because that line matched what I'd already seen. Words she didn't know I had saved, waiting on my phone like a loaded truth. That's when Ashley, her cousin, the one who talks like every family gathering is a podcast, leaned forward with a grin. Okay. So, are we joking, or are we doing the real talk thing now?" Heather tried to grab the room back. She threw out another little line about me being too steady, too predictable, like stability was something to laugh at. A few people let out awkward chuckles, the kind you do when you don't want to pick a side. I didn't look at Ashley. I didn't look at Heather either. I looked at her mom. "Have you ever noticed," I said quietly, "she only brings me up when she needs a punchline?" Her mother's smile slipped. She opened her mouth like she had an answer ready, and nothing came out. Because once you see it, you can't unsee it. Heather shifted in her seat, suddenly aware the spotlight had moved. I nodded, almost gently. "And before anyone tells me I'm misunderstanding her," I added, "I've got screenshots." The laughter didn't just stop. It turned, slowly, sharply, into suspicion pointed right at her. Heather's eyes flashed like I'd just pulled a weapon at the table. "Screenshots of what?" she snapped, too fast, too loud. I kept my voice even. That calm was doing more damage than yelling ever could. "Of you," I said, "talking about our marriage like it's a joke, and a trap." Then I quoted it, word for word, so nobody could pretend I was exaggerating. "Marriage is a prison." I let the sentence hang. "That's what you texted your coworker." Her dad's face tightened. He didn't look at me. He looked straight at his daughter. "Heather," he said, low and sharp, "did you say that?" She didn't answer. No excuse, No laugh, no comeback, just silence, like her throat suddenly understood consequences. I nodded once. "I'm not here to make a scene," I said. "I'm here to end one." I pushed my chair back and stood. Behind me, the backyard buzzed with panic, whispers, shifting, somebody clearing their throat. And I walked into the house, knowing the next minute would turn her whole family against the version of her they thought they knew. Inside the house, the noise dropped behind the door like someone hit mute. I walked straight to the bathroom, turned on the cold water, and splashed my face until my skin stung. In the mirror, I didn't look furious. I looked light, like I'd been carrying a weight so long I forgot it was there. Through the open window, I heard my mother-in-law's voice crack. "Sweetheart, what did you do?" Heather answered fast, breathy, spinning, trimming, reshaping the truth into something cute enough to survive a barbecue. I dried my hands slow. No rush, no panic. That was new. When I stepped back outside, her dad met my eyes like a man trying to keep his family from splitting in half. He started to speak. I lifted a hand, gentle but final. "Sir, this isn't your burden." Then I looked at Heather. "We'll talk. In private. But understand something." I let the words sit cold between us. "This has already started." And the look on her face told me she finally believed me. The drive home felt like moving through fog, even though the sky was clear. Heather's hand squeezed the steering wheel until her knuckles went pale. She kept glancing at me like she was waiting for the old version of me to show up, angry, begging, apologizing for making things awkward. Finally, she broke. "You really embarrassed me back there." I didn't even turn my head. "You embarrassed yourself." She let out that sharp little laugh she uses when she's trying to climb back on top. "Oh my God, Lucas, you're overreacting. Everyone knew I didn't mean it." I watched the road lines slide under the headlights. "No," I said. "They didn't, and neither did I." Her voice tightened. "It was a joke." "That wasn't a joke," I said, calm enough to cut. "That was a confession. You just said the quiet part out loud." The car went silent again, heavier than any shouting match. And when we pulled into our driveway, I realized the next conversation wasn't going to be a fight. It was going to be a reckoning. We pulled into the driveway and the porch light hit the front of the house like a spotlight on something we'd been pretending was fine. 2 cars, clean siding, a garage full of tools and holiday boxes, the kind of place people call making it. And yet, when the engine shut off, it felt colder than the night air. Heather didn't get out right away. "So that's it?" she said, staring at the steering wheel. "You're really ending it?" I slipped my keys into my pocket and finally looked at her. "No," I said. "You ended it the moment you decided I was safest as a joke." She exhaled hard, like she'd been wronged. "I was stressed. I didn't mean it." I stepped out, then paused by the hood, letting the quiet do the work. "You've been saying it for months," I said. "To different people, in different ways. Tonight was just the first time you did it with an audience." Her head snapped toward me, the color drained from her face. Because that's the moment she realized this wasn't about one line at a BBQ. This was about what I already knew, and what I still hadn't said out loud. Inside, the house smelled like lemon cleaner and old routines. Heather followed me in like she could still talk her way back into control. She crossed her arms, chin up, trying to turn it into a normal argument. "Who told you?" she asked, sharp. "Who's been in our business?" I didn't even flinch. "Doesn't matter," I said. "The point is, you said it," she scoffed. "So you're just going to throw everything away because somebody repeated something I vented?" I set my keys on the counter and faced her. "I didn't throw anything away," I said. "I held it together. I carried the mortgage, the bills, the life we built. While you treated me like a placeholder you could mock whenever you needed applause." Her eyes narrowed. "You always make yourself the victim." I almost smiled at that, because it was the oldest trick in her book. "I'm not a victim," I said, voice low and steady. "I'm just done." Then I let the truth land, simple and brutal. Love doesn't survive disrespect. It starves. And for the first time, she didn't have a quick laugh to cover it. She kept standing there like if she talked long enough, I'd fold, like every argument we ever had was just a storm I was supposed to wait out. Her voice sharpened. So what, Lucas? You're really going to blow up our life over words? I didn't answer right away. I walked to the bookshelf, slid my fingers behind a binder I'd hidden in plain sight, and pulled out a folder so thick it made a dull slap when I set it on the table. Bank statements, mortgage history, utility bills, credit card records, every payment, every transfer, every quiet sacrifice with a date attached. Heather's eyes widened. What is that? Why do you have that? Because I prepared, I said, calm like I was explaining the weather. For the day you made it impossible to stay. She stared at the folder like it was betrayal. Then she reached for the only card she thought still worked. You love me. I held her gaze and let the truth land without drama. I did, I said. Past tense. Her face cracked. Not from sadness first, but from shock. Like she'd just realized love isn't a leash. And once that word left my mouth, there was no way back. Heather backed away like the air in the room had turned on her. She shook her head once, twice, like she could shake the moment loose. Then she spun and went upstairs. A door slammed hard enough to rattle the picture frames in the hallway. I didn't follow. That was the old me. The fixer. The guy who'd chase her tears like they were my responsibility. I stayed downstairs at the kitchen table, listening to the clock tick like a hammer, 1 second at a time, driving the point home. This is real. I grabbed a notepad and started writing, not because I wanted to be cold, but because I needed to be clear. Clothes, toiletries, documents, camera, keys, the things that were mine, the things I was done earning. I stared at the list and whispered something I'd never allowed myself to believe. Peace isn't quitting. Sometimes peace is survival. I packed a small bag, zipped it shut, and walked down that hallway like it belonged to a stranger. Behind that bedroom door, she was still crying, and I left anyway. I drove with no plan, just streetlights and empty lanes sliding past like they didn't want to be seen. No music, no podcasts, just the hum of tires and my own thoughts finally speaking without her cutting in. My phone kept lighting up on the passenger seat. Heather. Again. 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 I pulled into a 24/7 diner off the highway, the kind with cracked vinyl booths and a neon sign that flickers like it's tired. I ordered black coffee and stared out the window like the glass could explain my life back to me. The phone buzzed again. I answered. Lucas, please, can we talk? We did talk, I said, quiet and flat. You didn't listen. Her voice broke into that familiar panic. I didn't mean it. We can do counseling. We can fix this. We already tried, I said. You treated it like a debate. She started to say my name like it used to pull me back. I didn't let it. I'm done, I said, and I hung up. The diner suddenly felt too bright, and I knew if I went home in the morning, she'd be waiting, ready to rewrite the night like it never happened. Morning came too clean for what we'd done. Sunlight poured through the living room windows like it had no idea our marriage was bleeding out. Heather was already there on the couch, eyes puffy, hair pulled back like she'd been awake all night rehearsing. You're my husband, she said the second I walked in, like it was a legal spell. I set my keys down gently. Not anymore. She flinched hard, like the words had weight. You can't just decide that for both of us. I looked at her for a long second, long enough to remember every time I swallowed a remark to keep the peace. You decided, I said. Every time you called me an anchor, every time you made me the punchline, every time you told people I was holding you back. Her voice sharpened. I was venting. No, I said. You were being honest. Now you're scared of what honesty costs. She stood up fast, stepping toward me. So what now? I didn't answer with a speech. I just started walking toward the stairs, because the next thing I did was going to make this permanent. I went upstairs and opened the closet like I was reaching into a life I'd already outgrown. The suitcase thumped onto the bed. Shirts, jeans, a belt, simple things that suddenly felt like evidence. Heather stood in the doorway, arms crossed tight, trying to look tough while her voice shook. You really planned this, she said. You were preparing to leave me. I didn't stop folding. Preparing isn't the same as planning, I said. Planning is what you do when you want something to happen. Preparing is what you do when you're tired of being blindsided. Her eyes flashed. You're going to regret this. That line used to scare me. It used to make me think I was about to lose the best thing I'd ever get. Now it just sounded like a threat from someone who'd never respected what I carried. I zipped the suitcase halfway and finally looked at her. If this was good, I said, voice low, steady, I'd still be trying. She went still, like she'd been waiting for anger, and got something worse. Clarity. I didn't slam doors. I didn't yell goodbye. I carried my bag down the stairs, past the framed photos on the wall, smiles frozen in time like they belonged to strangers. Heather followed me to the bottom step, but she didn't touch me. She just watched, eyes wide, like she couldn't believe I was actually walking out. The night air outside felt sharp and clean. I drove to Eric's place by the lake, a modest little house where the porch light always worked and nobody asked questions first. He opened the door in sweatpants, looked me up and down, and let out a dry laugh. "You look like hell," he said. I exhaled, and it felt like my ribs unclenched for the first time in months. "Got room for one more?" He stepped aside. "Yeah, come on." That first night I slept. Not perfectly, just uninterrupted. No tension in the walls, no footsteps upstairs, no waiting for the next jab. Peace showed up like something I hadn't earned. And that's how I knew it wouldn't last. Because the moment you finally stop cleaning up someone else's mess, they start making a bigger one. For 3 days, Heather called like it was her full-time job. First it was crying, soft, shaky, "Please, Lucas." Then it was bargaining, counseling, date nights, promises she'd never kept before. By day 3, it turned sharp. Accusations, blame. Like if she couldn't pull me back with love, she'd drag me back with guilt. I answered less and less. On the 3rd day, I stopped completely. On the 4th, I was in a meeting at work. Conference room, stale coffee, people pretending to care about quarterly numbers, when the receptionist buzzed my phone. Her voice was careful, the way people sound when they're about to hand you a problem. "Lucas, there's a woman here asking for you. She says it's urgent." My stomach dropped. I already knew. I walked out to the lobby and there she was. Heather, hair messy, eyes red, clutching a manila folder like it was a weapon. Heads turned. Conversations died. The glass doors behind her reflected the whole scene like a mirror I couldn't break. She didn't just show up, she crossed a line on purpose. I didn't argue in the lobby, I didn't give her the satisfaction of an audience. I pushed the door open and motioned her outside, where the parking lot heat hit like a slap. She followed, still gripping that folder, breathing hard like she'd sprinted here on pure panic. 5 minutes, she said. That's all I'm asking. Not here, I answered. Her face tightened. You can't do this in front of them. She nodded back toward the building, like I was the one who brought shame to my own workplace. I stared at her, then said it plain. I didn't ask you to come. That landed. Hard. Because it flipped the whole script. She wasn't the woman fighting for her marriage anymore. She was the person who couldn't stand losing control. She lifted the folder a little, voice turning calm in a way that felt practiced. I talked to a lawyer, she said, and in that moment I realized she wasn't here to apologize. She was here to negotiate my surrender. Heather lifted that manila folder like it gave her authority. Her voice got strangely calm, the kind of calm people borrow from lawyers. I talked to an attorney, she said. He says I'm entitled to half. She waited for me to flinch, to bargain, to panic. I didn't. I nodded once. Good, I said. So did I. Her eyes widened, just a little. You... what? I held her stare and let the sentence drop clean. I filed yesterday. It was like the ground shifted under her feet. For the first time, she wasn't performing. She was calculating, fast, desperate, trying to rewind a reality that doesn't rewind. You can't do that, she snapped. That's not fair. I almost laughed, but there was no humor in it. Fair? I said, low and steady. Fair never lived in our marriage. I carried the load and you carried the jokes. Her mouth opened, searching for something. Love, guilt, rage, anything that would move me. But the power had already changed hands, and she knew it. When I walked back into the building, the lobby felt smaller. People looked away like eye contact might make them part of it. A few coworkers pretended to study their phones. Someone whispered my name like it was a headline. I didn't blame them. I just went straight to my desk and worked. It sounds cold, but that's the truth. Work gave me something she couldn't. Control. Clear tasks. Clear outcomes. No mind games. No, just kidding after a cut. For the first time in a long time, my body started to unclench. I slept through the night at Eric's place. I ate like a person again. I could breathe without waiting for the next hit. And then, Heather went quiet. No calls, no texts, nothing. Most people would call that peace. I wanted to believe it was over, but silence from someone like Heather isn't surrender. It's strategy. That quiet wasn't an ending. It was the pause before the next move. And deep down, I felt it coming the way you feel thunder before you hear it. 2 weeks of silence had almost convinced me she was done. Almost. I pulled into the lot after work, the air still warm, my mind already halfway to the lake and a quiet dinner. Then I saw her. Heather was sitting on the hood of my car like she owned it, legs crossed, arms loose, chin lifted, not crying, not pleading, smiling. That same smile she wore at the BBQ right before she cut me down. The I'm still in control smile. It was the first thing that made my stomach tighten, because tears are honest. That smile was strategy. "You've been ignoring me," she said, like I was the one breaking rules. I stepped out slowly and didn't give her the reaction she came for. She slid off the hood, heels clicking on the pavement, eyes scanning me like she was looking for the old Lucas, the guy who'd explain himself, soften, negotiate. But I could see it clear as day now. She wasn't here to apologize. She was here to fight for leverage. And standing there in that parking lot, watching her smile hold steady, I realized the real battle hadn't even started yet. "You don't get to decide this," Heather snapped, following me toward the door like the conversation was a leash. "You can't just leave and think that's the end." I unlocked the door, calm on purpose. "I didn't make the mess," I said. "I just stopped cleaning it up." She scoffed, but her eyes were sharp, working angles. "My lawyer says I'm entitled to half. Half the house, half the savings, half of everything." I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I didn't even look surprised. That's what scared her. "I kept records," I said, stepping inside. "Every bill, every payment, every transfer, every time I carried what you called boring." Her jaw tightened. "So you've been planning to destroy me?" I turned and met her gaze. "No, I planned to protect myself." She searched my face for anger, anything she could hook into. When she couldn't find it, she changed tactics, voice turning cold. "You're heartless now." I almost smiled. "No," I said. "I'm just not bleeding anymore." And that's when her smile finally slipped. Because calm is the one thing she couldn't control. Heather's voice turned sharp again, like she could cut her way back into control. "You were controlling," she said. "You always had to be right. You made me feel small." I didn't react. I let her words hang there. Then I said it slow, so she couldn't twist it. "No, Heather. You made yourself small by standing on the person who was holding you up." That landed different. Not like an insult, like a diagnosis. For the first time all night, she didn't have a comeback. No laugh, no spin, just a blink, too long, like her brain was searching for the old script and coming up empty. Her shoulders dropped a fraction. When she spoke again, the edge was gone. I don't want to do this alone," she admitted, almost like it slipped out. I nodded, not cruel, just honest. "You've been doing it alone for a long time," I said. "You just didn't notice because I was still in the room." She frowned. "What does that even mean?" I met her eyes. "It means I wasn't your partner. I was your wallpaper." The words sat there, ugly and true, and I watched it sink in. Her face tightened like she'd been slapped, not because it hurt, because it exposed her. She straightened up fast, grabbing whatever pride she had left. "You'll regret this," she said. "You'll see what happens when you make me your enemy." I didn't step back. I didn't raise my voice. I just looked at her the way you look at a door you finally decided to walk through. "I already did," I said. She hesitated, confused, because that wasn't the reaction she came for. Then I finished it. calm and clean. "You were my wife." It was simple. No curse words, no lecture. But it hit her harder than all the shouting we'd ever done. Her eyes flinched first, then her whole body followed. She turned and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the walls seemed to shake. I stood there in the quiet and noticed something that surprised me. I wasn't shaking, not even a little. And in that stillness, I felt the beginning of something I hadn't had in years. Peaceful silence. The kind that doesn't beg you to fix it. The kind that just lets you breathe. The weeks after that were quieter than I expected. Not happy, just stable. I started going to the gym again, nothing heroic, just enough to feel my body come back online. I worked late on purpose. I met Eric for coffee by the lake. I called a couple old friends I'd let drift because marriage needed all my time. It was the first time in years my days didn't revolve around managing Heather's mood. She tried different doors, texts through mutual friends, little checking-in messages with fake kindness. I didn't answer, not out of spite, out of self-respect. If I replied, I'd be back in the role. The fixer, the guy who smooths things over. Then Friday afternoon my phone rang and I saw her brother's name. Aaron and I weren't close, but he wasn't dramatic either. That's why I picked up. "She's at Mom's," he said, crying for hours. I stared at the wall and felt that old reflex rise. Rush in, save the day. I swallowed it. "That's not my job anymore," I said. And the moment I said it, I knew I'd crossed a line I couldn't uncross. That night, I stood on Eric's back deck and watched the sun go down over the water. The sky burned orange, then cooled into purple like a bruise fading. For the first time, my mind was quiet. No arguing in my head, no replaying conversations, no planning how to make it better. Just stillness. I went to bed thinking maybe that was the end of it. The next morning there was a knock at the door. Not a soft knock. A careful one. Like whoever was on the other side was hoping I'd answer before they lost their nerve. I opened it, and there she was. Heather. Eyes swollen, makeup smeared. No smile this time. No lawyer folder. Just her, standing in daylight looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. "Please," she whispered. "Just hear me out." I should have closed the door. I knew that. Curiosity is a stupid thing, but it's powerful. I stepped back and let her in. And as she crossed the threshold, I realized this wasn't going to be another fight. This was going to be her last move. Heather stepped inside like she was walking into a church. Quiet, careful, afraid to touch anything. In her hands was a small box, taped shut, corners worn like it had been opened and closed a dozen times. She set it on the coffee table between us like an offering. "Everything you ever gave me," she said. "Letters, pictures, the watch, the little stuff you thought I didn't notice." That was the play. Nostalgia. If she could drag me back to who we used to be, she wouldn't have to face who she became. I didn't reach for it. I sat there with my hands in my lap, steady as stone. "Keep it," I said. Her throat tightened. "Lucas, I'm trying." "I know," I answered, "but I'm not going to be softened into staying." She swallowed hard and looked down at the box like it could save her. "Every time I see this," she whispered, "I remember what I ruined." I nodded once, not cruel, just clear, because the hardest part wasn't the box. It was realizing she finally understood, and it was still too late. Heather's shoulders shook, but she didn't fall apart the way she used to. It was quieter than that, like grief with nowhere to go. She stared at the box and said, almost to herself, "I get it now. I lost you." I didn't correct her. I just told the truth she'd avoided for years. "You lost the man who loved you more than his own peace," I said. "That's what you lost." She looked up, eyes glassy. "And you? What did you lose?" I exhaled slow. "I lost the version of me that thought disrespect was the price of love," I said. "The guy who'd keep smiling while he was shrinking." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Do you hate me?" I held her gaze and felt nothing sharp, no revenge, no heat, just distance. "No," I said. I don't hate you. I paused, letting it land the way it needed to. I just don't belong to this story anymore. And the silence after that wasn't punishment, it was closure. Heather stood up slowly, like her knees didn't fully trust her anymore. She didn't grab the box. She didn't ask me to walk her out. She just moved toward the door with that quiet, defeated kind of dignity people wear when they've run out of tricks. Her hand paused on the doorknob. She didn't turn around at first. When she finally did, her eyes were dry. Too dry. I hope she makes you happy, she said. For a second, I honestly didn't know what she meant. Who? I asked. Her mouth tightened, not in anger, more like acceptance with teeth. Whoever comes next. It wasn't a blessing. It was a blade. But it was also the closest thing to accountability she'd ever offered, admitting there would be a next, and it wouldn't be her. I nodded once, because there was nothing to argue with. She opened the door, stepped out, and closed it gently behind her. The house went quiet. So quiet it felt like snowfall. And in that silence, I understood. Some goodbyes don't explode. They freeze. Time didn't heal me overnight. It just moved. The divorce started rolling forward like a slow train you can't stop once it leaves the station. Paperwork, signatures, meetings that feel more like autopsies than conversations. Heather and I didn't scream anymore. We didn't have to. The truth was already settled. I kept my life simple. Work, gym, Eric's lake house, early nights, black coffee, slow, steady, like rebuilding a spine. And then I met Claire. Not in some dramatic way. No fireworks, just real life. A friend of a friend, a quiet conversation that didn't turn into a power game. She listened without scanning for weaknesses. She laughed without it sounding like a weapon. She didn't need to win every moment. That messed with my head at first. I kept waiting for the punchline, the little jab, the just kidding after a cut. It never came. And one night, driving home after a simple dinner, it hit me. I wasn't tense. I was safe. Not because love suddenly got easy, because this time, love didn't come with fear. One night, Claire and I were cooking like it was the most normal thing in the world. Pasta on the stove, garlic in the air, her hair tied up, music low enough to talk over. No tension, no careful wording. Just two people sharing a kitchen without walking on eggshells. She glanced at me while she stirred the sauce and smiled. You know, she said, you smile different now, like you're coming home. That hit me harder than I expected, because home used to mean a mortgage, a porch light, a garage full of boxes. But with Heather, I was never home. I was surviving, managing moods, measuring words, taking hits and calling it love. With Claire, respect wasn't something I had to earn back after every joke. It was just there. I was about to say something honest, when my phone buzzed on the counter. One name lit up the screen. Heather. The room didn't change, but my body did. My chest tightened like an old lock turning. Claire didn't ask questions. She just watched my face. And I realized the past doesn't disappear. It waits until you finally feel happy, then tries to collect. The next day, a handwritten letter showed up. Not a text, not an email. Actual paper, thick envelope, my name written in her familiar slant, like she wanted nostalgia to do the talking before her words even reached me. I sat at the table and opened it slow. The first paragraph was apology. The second was history. By the third, I could feel the hook. The version of us she wished I'd remember. The version that let her get away with disrespect because I called it commitment. I stopped reading. Just stopped. No, I said out loud to an empty room. I walked to the fireplace, struck a match, and watched the flame catch like it had been waiting. Then I held the letter over the fire and let the edge curl. Ink warped. Sentences buckled. Her careful handwriting turned into black lace. I didn't feel rage. I felt release. The paper folded into itself, then collapsed into ash. That was the real goodbye, not the BBQ, not the filings. The moment I burned the anchor she kept throwing back into my life. I watched the ashes drift down and settle like gray snow. No anger, no satisfaction, just a strange quiet, the kind you get when a long argument finally runs out of air. I realized I wasn't grieving Heather anymore. I was grieving the idea of her, the woman I thought I married, the promise I kept trying to protect, the real thing, the real marriage. It was built on disrespect disguised as joking, contempt disguised as stress, and my patience turned into a free pass. I'd spent years calling it love because I didn't want to admit I was being slowly erased in my own house. That night, staring into the last glow of the fire, I made it simple. Peace wasn't a mood, it was a rule. A line I wasn't going to cross again for anyone. I said it out loud just to hear it become real. Freedom doesn't show up when someone finally treats you right. Freedom shows up when you finally realize you should have left the first time you were made to feel small, and you choose yourself anyway. I kept thinking back to that BBQ, the smoke, the laughter, the way one sentence could crack a whole life. I regret marrying him every day. People heard it as a joke. I heard it as a verdict. And here's what I learned the hard way. A man doesn't need fancy romance to stay. He needs 3 things: security, love, respect. Security is the mortgage paid, the lights on, the feeling you can breathe in your own home. Love is knowing you're not alone in the room, knowing you're wanted, not just used. Respect is the foundation under both. Without it, love doesn't die in one big moment. It starves, slow. When you don't feel like you belong, you start living like a guest in your own house. And when self-respect dies, what's left isn't marriage, it's performance. 2 people playing roles for the outside world while one of them quietly disappears. That's why I can say this without hate. I didn't divorce a person. I divorced a role. Here's the part people don't talk about. The scariest thing isn't getting left. It's being disrespected in public and realizing everyone just laughed along like it was normal. A joke can be truth wearing a mask. And once you see that mask slip, you can't pretend you didn't. That BBQ taught me my line wasn't money, or sex, or even loyalty. My line was respect. Because without respect, everything else turns into a job you're never paid for. And no, being a man doesn't mean you scream louder. Sometimes the most masculine thing you can do is walk away without begging for permission. That's not weakness. That's self-respect finally breathing. So I'll ask you straight, man to man, if you were sitting at that table, if your wife laughed and said she regretted marrying you while everyone watched, what would you do? Would you swallow it again? Or would you end it right there? Because that's the fork in the road, isn't it? You get 2 choices. You either stay and endure, keep telling yourself it's not that bad, keep paying the bills, keep taking hits, hoping respect magically grows back. Or you choose peace, even if it costs you comfort, even if it costs you the image, even if it means starting over with your pride intact. And let me say this clear. Love isn't infinite endurance. Love has to have consequences, or it turns into permission. The reason my marriage died wasn't one sentence at a BBQ. It was years of her learning my silence meant, go ahead. That's why it went the way it did. BBQ, the receipts, walking out, burning the letter. One long line of me finally refusing to be wallpaper. If you think that's where stories like this end, they don't. Hit subscribe and stick around, because the next part isn't about my marriage. It's about what happens to people who mistake peace for weakness. I used to think revenge had to be loud. Slam the door, say the cruel thing, make sure everybody knows you got hurt. But the truth is, the quiet goodbye is sometimes the loudest revenge, because it leaves nothing to argue with. No scene to replay, no opening to twist. I didn't hit Heather back with words. I didn't try to ruin her. I just disappeared from the role she built for me. I stopped being the man she could insult and still count on. That's not cruelty. That's consequences. And I didn't win against her. If you're keeping score in a marriage, you already lost. What I won was something else. My fear. The fear of being alone. The fear of starting over. The fear of what people would say. Because peace costs. It costs comfort. It costs the familiar. But it's still the most valuable thing a man can buy back. I still see it sometimes. The letter curling in the fireplace. Ink collapsing. Paper turning weightless, ash drifting down like snow. That was the sound of my old life finally letting go. That sentence, so do I, it marked my life like a scar. Not because it was clever, because it was the first time I said the truth without cushioning it for someone else's comfort. A lot of men think they have to be perfect to deserve love. You don't. You just have to be treated with basic respect. You can be tired. You can be boring. You can be steady. You can be a working man who pays the bills and keeps showing up. None of that makes you disposable. And if respect isn't there, don't call it love. Call it what it is: convenience, control, a person using your patience as a safety net. I'm not proud of how long I stayed, but I'm grateful for what it taught me, because it saved the rest of my life. And if any of this hit you in the gut, I want to hear it. Drop a comment. Tell me your version. The moment you realized you were being taken for granted. Because if you've ever been the safety net, you already understand the weight of that word. Men go quiet all the time, not because it doesn't hurt, but because we were raised to carry it. Keep your head down, pay the bills, don't complain, be the rock. And for a while, that works. You tell yourself you're being strong, but carrying isn't the same as being stepped on. There's a difference between sacrifice and slow self-erasure, between patience and permission. And if you don't draw a line early, your heart doesn't explode, it just shuts down. One day you wake up and realize you've been living with someone, but you haven't felt respected in years. That's why I'm saying this like a warning, not a speech. Set your line while you can still feel. While you still have the energy to fight for your own dignity. Don't wait until you're numb, because numb is harder to come back from than anger. And the part that keeps me up sometimes? A lot of men never get their moment at the table. A lot of men never get to say, "So do I." They just stay. Forever. I can still hear the laughter from that picnic table, the clink of a glass, the casual way people laugh when they think they're watching a harmless joke. That was the moment I died a little, right in front of everybody. And it was also the moment I started coming back to life, because for once, I didn't pretend it was okay. That's what people miss. The line wasn't drawn because I wanted drama. It was drawn because I wanted to live. I chose 3 things I should have chosen sooner. Security, so I could breathe. Belonging, so love felt like a home, not a job. And self-respect, so I didn't have to shrink to keep the peace. And if you take nothing else from my story, take this. You have a right to be respected in your own home. Not tolerated, not joked about. Respected. Because the moment respect is gone, everything else becomes a performance. And that's exactly what I'm going to wrap up in the final minute. So that's the whole arc. One public humiliation at a backyard BBQ turned into a truth I couldn't unhear. I stopped bargaining. I set a boundary. I walked out, and I closed the door for good. First with paperwork, then with ashes. Here's the message I learned the hard way. Love can't breathe without respect. Not long term, not in the real world. And if you stay silent too long, you don't keep the peace. You slowly lose yourself piece by piece until you're living as a role instead of a man. My last line is simple. I didn't leave a person. I left disrespect. Now I want you to pick a side. No middle ground. Type 1. If you think a man should stay to keep things calm, swallow it and try harder. Type 2. If you believe peace is worth starting over for, walk away the moment respect dies. And if this hit you anywhere close to home, share this video with one guy who needs to hear it. Drop your story in the comments, because somebody reading it is still sitting at that table, waiting to breathe again.